In 2016, the American Cancer Society estimated that approximately 40% of Americans will receive a cancer diagnosis at some point in their lifetime. 40%. That means if you are sitting in a room with 10 people right now, 4 of them will hear the words, "You have cancer," before they die. Cancer is so prevalent in modern life that most people have stopped thinking of it as unusual. It is woven into the fabric of contemporary existence. The fundraising walks, the awareness ribbons, the treatment centers built into every major hospital on Earth, the pharmaceutical industry worth hundreds of billions of dollars built specifically to manage it. We have normalized it. We have built institutions around it. We have accepted it as one of the fundamental risks of being alive in the 21st century. And almost nobody has stopped to ask the question that changes everything. Was it always like this? Because the answer, buried in bones and mummies and fossilized tissue from across millions of years of human and pre-human history, is a decisive and deeply uncomfortable no. Cancer is not a fundamental risk of being human. It is a risk of being the specific kind of human that the modern world has created. And the evidence for that statement goes back 1.7 million years, to a bone that should not exist, found in a cave in South Africa, that started one of the most important and least publicized medical investigations of the past decade. Here is what every oncologist knows, but almost no public health campaign has been willing to say directly. When researchers systematically analyze ancient human remains, Egyptian mummies, prehistoric skeletons, fossilized bones from our earliest ancestors, they find cancer. It existed. It was real. It caused suffering and death in prehistoric populations. But they find it at a rate so dramatically lower than modern incidence that the comparison is almost difficult to process. A landmark study analyzing over 10,000 Egyptian mummies found evidence of cancer in fewer than 5% of the remains studied. Fewer than 5%. In modern populations, the lifetime cancer risk is approximately 40%. That is an 8-fold increase. Not a gradual drift upward as medical detection improved, an 8-fold increase in a disease that left clear physical evidence in bone and tissue that would have survived in the archaeological record if it had been present at modern rates. It was not present at modern rates, which means the cancer epidemic is not something that happened to humanity. It is something that humanity did to itself. And the 1.7 million-year-old tumor is the place where that story begins. Before we go further, I want you to think about something personal. Think about the last time you heard of someone being diagnosed with cancer. How long did you have to think? For most people in the modern world, the answer is not long. A family member, a colleague, a neighbor, a friend of a friend. The disease is so common that almost everyone has proximity to it. Now think about this. A prehistoric hunter-gatherer living 30,000 years ago would almost certainly have lived their entire life without ever knowing anyone who died of cancer. Not because their lives were short. The evidence shows that individuals who survived childhood regularly lived into their 50s, 60s, and occasionally beyond. But because the disease, while present, was so rare in that environment that a lifetime of experience might never produce a single case. What changed? That question has an answer. And the answer is one of the most consequential stories in the history of human health. Here is the theory that mainstream oncology has been slowly and reluctantly converging on for the past 20 years, and which the cancer research establishment has been careful not to state too bluntly because of what it implies for the food, chemical, and pharmaceutical industries simultaneously. Cancer is not primarily a genetic disease. It is primarily an environmental disease. The mutations that produce cancer occur in every human body, constantly, throughout life. The immune system identifies and destroys the vast majority of them before they become tumors. What the modern environment has done is not create new mutations. It has created conditions in which the immune system is chronically overwhelmed, compromised, or distracted, conditions that tip the balance from mutation surveillance to mutation proliferation. And the prehistoric environment, whatever its dangers, did not produce those conditions at anything approaching modern rates. The ancient skeleton with a tumor is not evidence that cancer is natural and inevitable. It is evidence that cancer can occur in any biological system capable of cellular reproduction. The modern cancer rate is evidence of something else entirely. In 2016, a team of researchers from the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa published a paper in the South African Journal of Science describing a fossil specimen from the Swartkrans cave system, a site that has produced some of the most important hominin fossils ever found. The specimen was a foot bone. ancient, fragmentary, roughly 1.7 million years old. And embedded in its structure was a lesion that the researchers, after careful analysis, identified as osteosarcoma, a malignant bone tumor. 1.7 million years old. This predates Homo sapiens by over 1.5 million years. The individual who carried this tumor was not human in the modern sense. They were a hominin, possibly Paranthropus robustus or early Homo, living in an African landscape utterly unlike anything we would recognize. And they had cancer. The same disease that will affect 40% of modern Americans. In a world without processed food, without industrial chemicals, without chronic sedentary behavior, without artificial light disrupting circadian rhythms, without any of the factors we associate with cancer risk in the modern era. Wait, if cancer existed 1.7 million years ago in a pristine prehistoric environment, but was present at only a fraction of modern rates, then the question is not whether our environment causes cancer. The question is, how much of it? But the Swartkrans tumor is only the beginning of this investigation. Because once researchers started looking systematically, once they started applying modern imaging technology to ancient remains on a large scale, they found a pattern in the data that nobody had predicted. Cancer was not absent from prehistoric populations, it was present. But it was distributed in a way that told a specific story about which cancers ancient humans got, which ones they almost never got, and what the difference between those two categories reveals about the modern cancer epidemic. The distribution was not random. It was a fingerprint. And reading that fingerprint required going back much further than anyone expected. Let's follow the evidence like detectives, because this investigation has a geography and a timeline. The first systematic large-scale study of cancer in ancient remains was conducted by researchers Rosalie David and Michael Zimmerman, published in the journal Nature Reviews Cancer in 2010. David and Zimmerman reviewed the literature on cancer in mummies and ancient skeletal remains across multiple cultures and time periods, Egyptian, South American, European, North American, and arrived at a conclusion that they stated with unusual directness for an academic paper. Cancer was rare in the ancient world, and the rarity was not an artifact of shorter lifespans or poor preservation. They noted specifically that mummification preserves soft tissue with sufficient fidelity to detect tumors that would have left no skeletal evidence, and that the mummy record, which includes thousands of specimens with well-preserved organs, showed cancer at dramatically lower rates than modern populations matched for age. The Egyptian evidence was particularly striking. Ancient Egyptians were not short-lived by prehistoric standards. Elite individuals routinely lived into their 50s and 60s, and the mummy record spans thousands of years. These were people old enough to develop the age-related cancers that dominate modern oncology, and the rate was still below 5%. Then researchers turned to the skeletal evidence from prehistoric hunter-gatherer populations, people living before agriculture, before urbanization, before any of the features of modern life, and found rates even lower. A 2019 analysis of pre-Columbian skeletal remains from North and South America found evidence of malignant tumors in fewer than 2% of specimens examined. 2%. In populations that included elderly individuals who had lived long enough to be biologically susceptible. And when researchers looked at which cancers appeared in ancient remains, another pattern emerged. The cancers present in prehistoric populations were overwhelmingly what oncologists call intrinsic cancers. Cancers arising from biological processes inherent to cellular reproduction, independent of environmental exposure. Bone cancers, certain blood cancers, cancers associated with chronic infection and parasitism. What was almost entirely absent from the prehistoric record was the category of cancers that dominates modern oncology. Carcinomas, cancers of epithelial tissue, of the lungs, the colon, the breast, the prostate, the pancreas. The cancers that kill the most people in the modern world were essentially invisible in the ancient record. Not rare, essentially absent. The distinction between intrinsic and extrinsic cancers is the key to understanding what the ancient evidence is actually telling us. A 2015 study published in Nature by researchers from the Wellcome Sanger Institute classified cancer mutations into two broad categories: clock-like mutations that accumulate in proportion to biological age regardless of environment, and environmentally driven mutations that accumulate in proportion to exposure to specific carcinogenic agents, tobacco smoke, certain chemicals, ultraviolet radiation, chronic inflammation from diet, disrupted circadian signaling. The ancient specimens showed the first category. The modern epidemic is overwhelmingly the second. A 2018 paper published in the journal Cancer Epidemiology, Biomarkers and Prevention analyzed trends in cancer rates across the 20th century and found that while some of the increase in diagnosed cancer was attributable to improved detection and population aging, a substantial and statistically significant portion of the increase, particularly for colon cancer, breast cancer, thyroid cancer, and certain leukemias, represented genuine incidence increases that could not be explained by detection or demographics alone. The cells were actually developing cancer at higher rates, not being found more often, developing it more often. And a 2020 meta-analysis published in PLOS One, reviewing cancer rates in contemporary hunter-gatherer and subsistence farming populations, the closest living analogs to prehistoric humans, found that these populations showed cancer rates approximately 5 to 10 times lower than age-matched individuals in industrialized nations. 5 to 10 times lower. Not living in pristine prehistoric environments. Living in the modern world, but eating and moving and sleeping in ways closer to prehistoric patterns. Think about what the prehistoric body was actually doing and not doing, that the modern body does differently at every scale. The prehistoric human was moving constantly. Not exercising, moving, as a continuous feature of daily existence. Foraging covered between 8 and 15 kilometers per day for most hunter-gatherer groups. That continuous movement maintained insulin sensitivity, kept chronic inflammation suppressed, regulated hormonal systems, and maintained the kind of immune function that is specifically associated with cancer surveillance. The prehistoric human was eating foods that had not been processed to remove fiber, that had not been engineered to maximize palatability and caloric density, that did not produce the chronic insulin spikes and inflammatory responses now associated with colon cancer, breast cancer, and prostate cancer risk. The prehistoric human was sleeping in synchrony with light cycles, rising with the sun, sleeping with the dark, their circadian rhythm intact. Disrupted circadian rhythm has been classified as a probable human carcinogen by the World Health Organization, associated specifically with increased breast and prostate cancer risk. The prehistoric human was not exposed to the approximately 80,000 synthetic chemicals introduced into the human environment since 1945, thousands of which have documented mutagenic or endocrine-disrupting properties. The prehistoric human was not chronically stressed in the low-grade, persistent, biologically expensive way that characterizes modern sedentary anxiety, the kind of chronic stress that maintains elevated cortisol, suppresses immune function, and creates the internal environment in which cancer cells have the best chance of evading detection. The prehistoric body, in other words, was running the cancer surveillance system the way it was designed to run. Not perfectly. 1.7 million-year-old tumors prove that. But at a fraction of the failure rate of the modern body, which is running that same system while simultaneously fighting chronic inflammation, hormonal disruption, chemical exposure, circadian dysregulation, and sedentary dysfunction simultaneously. I want you to feel what the prehistoric body actually felt like from the inside, or rather, what it did not feel like. You are 45 years old. In modern terms, you are statistically in the peak decade of cancer risk accumulation, but you have never been sedentary for more than a few hours at a time. Your body moves every day, not on a treadmill, not in a gym, but across terrain, carrying weight, using every muscle system in patterns it evolved to use. You have never eaten a food that came wrapped in packaging. You have never consumed refined sugar beyond what was available in seasonal fruit. Your sleep follows the sun with a precision that no alarm clock interrupts. Your stress is acute and real. There are actual predators, actual food shortages, actual physical dangers, but it resolves. It does not sit in your body as a low-grade hum of cortisol for decades. Your immune system has been doing its job since birth, identifying and destroying abnormal cells before they can establish. Not because your body is different from a modern body. Because the environment your body is operating in is giving it the inputs it was designed to receive. You will die. Probably of infection, or injury, or the accumulated damage of a physically demanding life. But almost certainly not of colon cancer, almost certainly not of breast cancer, or prostate cancer, or lung cancer. Not because cancer cannot reach you. 1.7 million years of fossil evidence proves it can. Because the system designed to stop it is running clean. But the lifestyle factors are only the surface of this story. Revelation 1, a 2019 study published in Cancer Cell, analyzed the tumor microenvironment, the immediate cellular ecosystem surrounding a cancer and found that chronic low-grade inflammation, of the type produced by modern dietary patterns and sedentary behavior, directly suppresses the function of natural killer cells and cytotoxic T cells, the two primary immune mechanisms responsible for identifying and destroying cancer cells before they form tumors. The modern diet is not just feeding cancer, it is disabling the system that kills cancer. Revelation 2, a 2021 paper published in Nature Medicine, found that the gut microbiome, the community of bacteria inhabiting the human digestive system, plays a direct and significant role in cancer immune surveillance, with diverse, fiber-rich microbiomes producing metabolites that enhance immune function and tumor suppression, while the low-diversity, processed food-associated microbiomes characteristic of modern Western populations consistently showing impaired cancer surveillance. The prehistoric human, eating a diet of diverse whole foods with dramatically higher fiber content than any modern diet, maintained a gut microbiome that was actively contributing to cancer prevention. The modern human, eating a diet of processed foods with minimal fiber, maintains a gut microbiome that is passively allowing cancer cells to escape detection. Revelation 3. And this is the one that reframes everything. A 2023 analysis published in the New England Journal of Medicine found that early onset cancer in people under 50, has been increasing at a rate of approximately 1 to 2% per year since the 1990s across multiple cancer types simultaneously. Not in elderly populations where age-related cellular damage accumulates. In young people whose prehistoric counterparts would have been at essentially zero risk for these specific cancers. The bodies getting cancer are not old bodies with accumulated damage. They are young bodies in an environment those bodies were never designed to inhabit. Here is the question that the cancer research establishment has been carefully not asking at full volume, because the answer implicates industries that collectively spend more on lobbying than the entire budget of the National Cancer Institute. If the evidence clearly shows that cancer rates in populations living closer to prehistoric lifestyle patterns are 5 to 10 times lower than in industrialized populations, if the specific cancers dominating the modern epidemic are almost entirely absent from the ancient record, if the biological mechanisms linking modern lifestyle factors to cancer suppression failure are now clearly documented, then why is the primary public health response to cancer focused on detection and treatment rather than on the environmental and behavioral factors that the evidence suggests are responsible for the majority of cases? The answer to that question involves the economics of cancer treatment, which is a multi-hundred-billion-dollar annual industry. Detection and treatment are profitable. Prevention, specifically, the kind of systemic prevention that would require changing the food environment, the chemical environment, the built environment, and the work environment, is not profitable. The prehistoric human did not have a cancer charity walk. They did not need one. But here is where our modern understanding of cancer completely fails us. We treat cancer as a disease of bad luck, of faulty genes, of random cellular malfunction that could happen to anyone at any time regardless of how they live. The ancient evidence does not support this framing. The 1.7 million-year-old tumor is not evidence that cancer is random and inevitable. It is evidence that cancer can occur in any biological system. The 40% modern lifetime risk is evidence that something specific to the modern world is overwhelming the biological system designed to prevent it. These are not the same statement. We collapse them into one, and the collapse cost us something very important. The understanding that the majority of modern cancer is not fate, it is environment. An environment, unlike genetics, is something a society can choose to change. Here is the assumption most people bring to this topic, that cancer rates are higher today primarily because people live longer, and cancer is an age-related disease, and therefore the comparison to ancient populations is unfair because ancient people died young before they could get cancer. The data does not support this. The Egyptian mummies with sub-5% cancer rates included individuals who lived into their 50s and 60s, ages at which modern cancer rates are substantial. The contemporary hunter-gatherer populations, showing 5 to 10 times lower rates than industrialized populations, are matched for age in the studies. The rise in early-onset cancer in people under 50 cannot be explained by population aging in any direction, and the specific cancers that are rare in prehistoric populations, colon, breast, prostate, lung, are precisely the cancers most strongly associated with dietary, chemical, and lifestyle exposures that are unique to modern industrial life. The longevity explanation is not wrong. Longer lives do create more opportunity for cancer to develop, but it explains a fraction of the difference. The lifestyle explanation explains most of it, and we have been using the fraction to avoid talking about the majority. This is what 1.7 million years of cancer evidence has been building toward. The Swartkrans tumor, proof that cancer is ancient and biological. The Egyptian mummy data, proof that ancient populations with significant lifespans still showed cancer at a fraction of modern rates. The hunter-gatherer comparison, proof that the difference is not genetic but environmental. The microbiome research, proof that modern dietary patterns are actively disabling cancer surveillance. The early onset data, proof that the epidemic is accelerating, not stabilizing. Taken together, these data points do not describe a disease that is tragically inevitable. They describe a disease that is almost entirely preventable at the population level, that our prehistoric ancestors experienced at rates so low they would be unrecognizable to a modern oncologist, and that we have allowed, through specific, identifiable, changeable choices about food systems, chemical exposure, built environments, and work culture, to become the defining health catastrophe of our civilization. A prehistoric human who walked 15 kilometers, ate diverse whole foods, slept with the sun, and maintained a gut microbiome of extraordinary diversity was not lucky. They were running the cancer surveillance system the way it was designed to run. We know how to run it that way. We have simply, collectively, chosen not to. The research on modifiable cancer risk factors has reached a level of consistency that should be front-page news and isn't. A 2018 analysis published in JAMA Oncology found that adherence to what the researchers called a low-risk lifestyle, never smoking, minimal alcohol, healthy weight, regular physical activity, and a diet high in whole foods and low in processed foods, was associated with a 40 to 60% reduction in overall cancer incidence and a 40 to 60% reduction in cancer mortality in a cohort of over 100,000 Americans. Not a marginal reduction, 40 to 60%. In a disease that will affect 40% of the population, the researchers estimated that a substantial fraction of all cancers diagnosed in the United States annually were attributable to lifestyle factors that are modifiable, not bad luck, not genetics. Modifiable. The prehistoric body was achieving its low cancer rate not through any special biological advantage, but through the same modifiable factors: movement, diet, sleep, gut microbiome, absence of chronic chemical exposure, that modern research has consistently identified as the most powerful levers available for cancer prevention. We have the data. We have had it for a decade. What we have not done is treat it with the urgency that a finding of this magnitude deserves. The 1.7 million-year-old tumor in the Swartkrans foot bone is not a message about inevitability, it is a message about rarity. That individual, whatever species they belonged to, whatever life they lived, was the exception in their world. The person who got the disease that almost no one around them got, who suffered from something their community had almost certainly never seen before and would almost certainly never see again. We have inverted that. We have built a world in which cancer is so common that the person who does not get it is the exception. And we have called this progress. The prehistoric human living their physically demanding, nutritionally diverse, chemically pristine, circadian-aligned life was not living well by accident. They were living in alignment with what their biology required. Every deviation from that alignment, every processed food, every sedentary hour, every disrupted night, every synthetic chemical absorbed into tissue, is a small tax on the cancer surveillance system. Individually, each tax is manageable. Collectively, across a lifetime in a modern industrial environment, they overwhelm the system. The lesson is not that we should live in caves. It is that we should understand what our biology was built to run on and make choices accordingly wherever we can. 1.7 million years ago, somewhere in what is now South Africa, a hominin walked through a landscape that had never seen a processed food, a synthetic chemical, a fluorescent light, or a sedentary workday. And they got cancer. It was extraordinarily rare. It was biological. It was real. And it was a tragedy for the individual who experienced it. The same disease, the same cellular betrayal, the same suffering that modern patients experience today. The disease is ancient. The epidemic is not. The epidemic is 40%. The epidemic is 1 in 2 men, 1 in 3 women. The epidemic is early onset cancer rising 1 to 2% per year in people under 50. The epidemic is not in the bones. It is in the environment we built and have not yet found the collective will to change. So here is the question that 1.7 million years of cancer history is asking you. If the prehistoric human almost never got the cancers that are now killing millions of people every year, And we know what changed, and we know what it did to the biology. What exactly are we waiting for?